much committed to a successful collective bargaining process, and we're hopeful that that process will lead to a settlement. We are a number of steps away from being in a situation where we're looking at a labour dispute at this time, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax-Clayton Park on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we definitely, all members of the House, support the work of nurses and value their work. And what we're talking about here today is just taking some prudent steps towards, making contingency plans and being ready in the event of a strike. So my question to the minister is, will the minister please indicate whether she is satisfied that the contingency plans in place will protect patients if we do in fact face a strike in Capital Health District?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to tell the House that I have, I think, very good relations both with the head of the nurses' unions and the CEOs at the District Health Authority. These are issues that we have discussed many times. In fact, I think, Mr. Speaker, it's something that I felt strongly about discussing before we ever got to a stage where we're threatened by the potential of a strike, and that is that we assure that we have strong essential services in our healthcare system in the event of labour disruptions. And Mr. Speaker, as I said, we're still quite some ways from the potential of a labour disruption. But I am very encouraged that we still have a strong collective bargaining process, and I would like to see that process work to the benefit of everyone involved, Mr. Speaker.
And the honourable member for Halifax-Clayton Park on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we acknowledge that there are a couple more steps left, but we're one step closer to a strike this week than we were last. The union is recommending a rejection of the offer that's on the table. Nurses working in mental health, public health, critical care, transplants, corrections, occupational health, nurse educators and rehabilitation have said to the government that they didn't like the first offer, and 3 days after conciliation, they still have not resolved this situation. Patients who rely on these essential services are wondering who will provide for them in the event of a strike. Today's media reports simply heighten that anxiety. So my question to the minister is, given the fact that she's already spoken to us and to the House here today that she's had discussions with the CEOs and is assured herself, could she please table to the House today, before the end of business, a copy of the contingency plan that is in place should the nurses go on strike?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, once again, I too value the work of all of the nurses in the Capital District, irrespective of the type of nursing they provide, whether they're in public health, a very important aspect of our healthcare system, or in the intensive care units, equally as critical, Mr. Speaker. But these nurses, their bargaining agent, are in the collective bargaining process, and I'm hopeful that that collective bargaining process will result in a positive outcome, and I want that process to proceed without any undue stress on the public, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today my question is for the Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, as many of us are aware, there's been a rash of recent violent crimes, and in particular those including guns, in the Halifax Regional Municipality. In fact, Mr. Speaker, to date we already have 8 homicides this year in comparison to 12 murders in all of 2010. So today, Mr. Speaker, Halifax Regional Council has reached out publicly to ask the Minister and his department for help. So can the Minister today explain how and what plans his department might have to assist Halifax Regional Council in addressing the increasing numbers of violent gun crimes in our communities?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
I'd like to thank the member for that question. And the issue of violence in the community, as I've stated in this House before, is something that's very important to me. I'm very concerned. And in that regard is that our staff is continually meeting with the various policing agencies. And we recently, as a fact today, a letter actually went out, but we had it prepared the other day, to the mayor and council, the mayor of Halifax, to meet and I spoke today with the chief of police and with the RCMP. So it's an ongoing issue. We take great concern in this, and I thank him for the question.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this isn't the first time Regional Council has reached out to the Minister. On February 21st, a letter from the Commissioner Earl Goss, Chair of the HRM Board of Police Commissioners, wrote to the Minister regarding additional officer programs. In the letter that was supported also by the regional councillors, Mr. Goss expressed, and I quote, "The additional officer program plays an important role in ensuring Nova Scotia is a safe and secure place to work and live. The program has allowed HRM to deploy officers to some of our most vulnerable communities. These communities are experiencing the effects of poverty, discrimination, and isolation. Many are struggling with drug trafficking and related violence. The program has had a direct impact on the violence in these communities and others," and I'll table that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on March 4th, the response by the Minister stated that severe financial challenges were being experienced by the province and that he could not ensure the program will remain. So my question to the Minister, can he assure the House today that during the review of this program, he'll consider both the role HRM plays in public safety in Nova Scotia and the impact that these officers have made in the communities that they serve?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, and once again, thank you to the member for that question. I did respond on March 4th to Mr. Goss in regards to his initial letter, and I had subsequently had a follow-up meeting with Mr. Goss, and at that time I advised him and others that were from various police commissions that, in fact, the program for this year was not being touched. So the request that he had put forth had been met.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, a recent article in the Coast uncovered some alarming figures regarding the Pinecrest Highfield Park areas of my community. Analysis of police call data showed that 7% of all police calls for serious incidents from 2005 to 2010 are in the areas of Highfield and Pinecrest. Among the most common incidents, assaults, robberies, drug use, weapons, and attempted suicides. So, Mr. Speaker, through you, can the Minister today commit to me to have a tour of my community with my local community constable as soon as the House arises?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for that question. As I stated in the House before, and I think that question was asked last year's seminar, my position is the same. Just contact my office to organize that. My position hasn't changed from that point. I will be more than happy to accompany him or others in the office, and I extend that invitation out to others in the House. I am very concerned and committed to policing in this province and the safety of all Nova Scotians. And if you feel there's a need for me to get that exposure, I'd be more than happy to see that we accommodate that.
The honourable member for Clayton Park.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health and Wellness. A well-integrated tobacco control strategy is one built on the premise that we reduce smoking rates. In order to do this, government can place its emphasis on two key groups of people: those who are younger and have not yet started to smoke but are at risk to do so, and those who have been smoking for a number of years. Both are equally important and both require equal attention by government. My question to the Minister is this, Mr. Speaker. When consulting around the new tobacco control strategy, did the Minister receive feedback indicating government should do more to assist current smokers?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there was extensive consultation in the development of the tobacco strategy with numerous groups. And Mr. Speaker, I think it is a very good strategy. I'm pleased with the endorsements we've received from district health authorities, Doctors Nova Scotia, Cancer Care Nova Scotia, Smoke Free Nova Scotia, and the Canadian Cancer Society. And I'm looking forward to the work implementing this strategy over the next 5 years, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the long-awaited tobacco control strategy certainly is another step forward, and we appreciate that. But it does contain 69 action items, and of those 69 action items, only one action item speaks to the importance of helping people quit smoking in an action-oriented way. Mr. Speaker, we know from Health Canada's reports that 3 months after a smoker quits smoking, their risk of heart attack drops. In 5 to 15 years after quitting, the stroke risk is reduced to that of a non-smoker. Mr. Speaker, heart attacks, strokes, and other health implications add significant cost to our health care system. It makes sense that we should be putting more resources into preventing those future cost burdens on our health care system. So again, as I said, Mr. Speaker, of 69 action items, only one relates to helping quit smoking. The others are general vision items and generally relating to having people never start to smoke. So my question to the Minister, Mr. Speaker, is why does this strategy mention only one action item that speaks to the need of investing in support to help people quit so that we can save money in the future?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, the member is correct in saying that there are multiple ways to address tobacco control. One is to keep people from ever becoming addicted to tobacco, and the other is to work with people who already are addicted to help them kick the habit, Mr. Speaker. And this strategy contains measures to address both of those concerns, Mr. Speaker. And additionally, we have identified the need to have better information and then action approaches to some groups that are marginalized, that have persistently high rates of tobacco use, such as people with mental health disorders, Mr. Speaker, and people from low-income groups. And as of yet, the specific activities that would target those groups have not been spelt out because the research needs to be conducted to help us establish what is the best approach to get at those more persistent and difficult groups of smokers, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And what we're really asking for here is some balance, and trying to balance those two aims and the two different groups of people that the strategy should speak to. And our belief is that there should be more emphasis on helping people quit, because the DHAs today will run out of money before the year ends every year on their smoking cessation plans. They're not able to help people as the year advances because the money is used up. So we're not helping at that end to the extent that we should. And Mr. Speaker, it's not a question of not having enough money, because I mentioned last week there are $200 million plus that we collect every year in taxes related to tobacco, and there was a $25 million settlement in just one legal case that the province benefited from. So we have the money, we should be investing it. And my question to the Minister, Mr. Speaker, given that the Minister wants evidence to guide spending decisions, and given that there is a mountain of clinical evidence showing that we can save money on future health care costs by helping people to quit smoking, why hasn't the Minister added any new monies to the strategy to do so?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, we've allocated the money in this budget, the budget for the social marketing campaign aimed at young people to prevent them from taking up smoking. Mr. Speaker, as the strategy rolls out over the next year, we will assess on an annual basis what the revenue needs are to support the various measures in the strategy. Mr. Speaker, the province of Nova Scotia spends the second most per capita on their tobacco control efforts of any other province in the country, Mr. Speaker. And I think that that fact, Mr. Speaker, speaks for itself.
The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Education. As the Minister is acutely aware, there is a serious issue that is plaguing the community of the Annapolis Valley. Countless media reports have been written about young individuals who have lost their lives and many still struggling to deal with addictions. One common thread when it comes to young people is the prevalence of farm parties where prescription drugs are taken in combination with alcohol. As many are aware, this can be a deadly combination, as we witnessed from a March death. My question to the Minister: what is the Minister doing from an education perspective to warn students about the dangers of farm parties?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for that question. As you know, we have been greatly affected across the province with the use of drugs in our young people, and so I take this situation extremely seriously. I know that within our school system we have guidance counselors, and our teachers are talking about this with their students all of the time. It's a tragedy, what we're going through in Nova Scotia with our young people and the choices that they're making. But I want everyone to know that we're taking this very, very seriously, and we're doing absolutely everything that we can to educate our young people not to take drugs and not to have this kind of activity. We will keep doing that and hope that it affects some kind of change. But what we really need to do too is hear from our youth to what we can do to support them and supporting each other and not going down this road. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the most passionate crusaders I know when it comes to dealing with the tragedy associated with prescription drug addictions is Linda Dory. Her son, while waiting for treatment, tragically took his own life earlier this year. Yesterday, Linda traveled to Calgary to present at the Prime Minister's constituency office about the urgency of this issue. Being part of a group here in Nova Scotia who has been looking for support from the province for the past 16 months, she felt it important to take her message to the next level due to the lack of urgency on the part of the provincial government. My question to the Minister of Health and Wellness: will the Minister agree to meet with Linda Dory to hear her story in order to ensure that any further government plans address the issue of timely treatment?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is an issue of great seriousness. Mr. Speaker, whenever a young person, has their life ended because of a drug overdose or any other tragedy, we all are very concerned, and we seek to understand what has occurred and what we can do as a society and as a government to address these issues. I have not had any contact from the lady that the member has raised. However, if she wishes to contact me and my office to request a meeting, we will certainly deal with that in the way that we deal with all requests for meetings with the Minister, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, many in the community are concerned that Dr. Gould's report will spend too much time focusing on the deaths of individuals. They feel that more needs to be done to focus on concrete actions that will help people today. However, little has changed so far. 4 people have approached my office in the last 7 days, all seeking treatment. Yesterday's most urgent case was passed on to the Provincial Director for Addiction Services, and all had to resort to investigating treatment through private options. My question to the Minister of Health and Wellness: will the Minister reassure the people of the Annapolis Valley that a concrete action plan will be part of Dr. Gould's interim report scheduled to come out in the not-too-distant future?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, what I've asked Dr. Gould to look at is not the deaths, but to look at the facts surrounding the situation that has been reported to me in the Annapolis Valley, and to make some recommendations with respect to addressing the situation as he is able to establish it. And I'm looking forward to receiving those recommendations in the next few days, Mr. Speaker. and at which time we will be able to move forward on this. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, today the Premier announced a $1,800,000 incentive to Toronto Dominion Insurance, a division of the Toronto Dominion Bank Group, hoping to have them create 140 jobs here in Nova Scotia. This appears to be a new policy of the government, Mr. Speaker, because previously when they wanted to give money to insurance companies, they were providing incentives to companies like Marsh or Flagstone Reinsurance, which are offshore insurance providers. Now they're giving $1,800,000 to the Toronto Dominion Bank, which is a direct competitor of the insurance providers here in Nova Scotia. I should add, Mr. Speaker, that the Toronto Dominion Bank made a profit last year of $4.6 billion and compete directly with the 1,100 insurance brokers of the province of Nova Scotia. And so my question to the Premier is this: why are Toronto Dominion Bank jobs more valuable to his government than the 1,100 Nova Scotia brokers who provide the same service here at home?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I wish the Leader of the Conservative Party had been at the announcement today. Mr. Speaker, TD Insurance has been in Nova Scotia since 1996. They started with a small operation with just 7 jobs. They've grown it to 165. They were looking to expand to work regionally, and this is a group that works on its insurance business on an inbound basis, so it's not calling out, it's receiving inbound calls, and they had a choice of the places that they could go to create those jobs. These are very significant, well-paying jobs, Mr. Speaker. They're going to create an additional 140 jobs over the next number of years, and we think that that's good for Nova Scotians. It's good for the young people going to get the jobs there. It's good for our economy.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The fact of the matter is that the 1,100 jobs that are done by the insurance brokers of Nova Scotia are also very important and valuable jobs in our province. TDI may have been in our province since 1996, but the fact of the matter is that the law prevents the Toronto Dominion Bank from directly selling insurance. And in fact, as the Premier will remember, even over the internet, the Federal Minister of Finance put in place some pretty tough restrictions on the ability to sell insurance if you're a bank over the internet. And if you'll indulge me for a moment, Mr. Speaker, the reason is quite important to know, because people who are going to a bank to borrow money are very financially vulnerable, and that is why they're being protected from the sale of insurance at that moment when they're applying for a loan. This is an important principle of our financial services industry that is designed to protect consumers. And so my question to the Premier is this: given that the government wants to give $1,800,000 to the Toronto Dominion Bank to provide this service in direct competition with Nova Scotia brokers, why is he siding with the bank and not on the side of consumers who deserve that legal protection?
Honourable the Premier.
No, Mr. Speaker, in the first part of his question, he actually made my point. This is not the bank. They are not competing with the brokers. TD Insurance is of course, a separate organization from the bank. And, Mr. Speaker, this is a regional operation. It just doesn't operate in Nova Scotia. It's going to operate regionally. It's going to create 140 good jobs here in this province. And, Mr. Speaker, today I met with young people who were graduates of St. Mary's, of Dalhousie, some of whom came from other countries to Nova Scotia, who are going to stay because they've got a good job with TDI. This is important for the economy, and I think the Leader of the Conservative Party should acknowledge it.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the 1,100 jobs that are currently done by Nova Scotians are also important jobs. And in fact, the protection of consumers of insurance is also important. I will just share with the Premier this quote from Ken Myers, the chair of the Insurance Brokers Association. The banks ought not to be able to sell insurance at the point of granting credit. The reason is obvious. That is not a fair point to be selling insurance. And so my question to the Premier is this. Those 1,100 brokers have not asked nor received any incentive for the work that they do in Nova Scotia, for the jobs that they provide all across our province, Mr. Speaker, for the profits that they return to their communities. Why is this government so determined to incent banks and not our own insurance brokers?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, first, again, this is TD Insurance. I want to point out that it was not a question of whether or not this work was going to take place. It was going to take place. The competition that exists among the various insurance companies was still going to be there. The only question was where the jobs were going to be located for young people to have. And in this case, because of the work that this government has done with TDI, those jobs are going to be located here. Those young people are going to be able to stay here. They are going to be able to build their lives here, Mr. Speaker. They are going to be able to raise their families here, and that's what's important.
The honourable member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, last night Halifax Regional Council joined our call in requesting that the provincial government adopt a strategy to deal with the recent increase in violent crime in our province. Recent shootings, stabbings and murders have alarmed Nova Scotians. Rather than make new investments in crime prevention strategies in this year's budget, the NDP government saw fit to cut the Department of Justice budget by $5.35 million. Now, my question is, how can the Minister of Justice justify cutting $475,000 from the discretionary crime prevention and restorative justice budget?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank you, the member, for the question. The answer to the question is very simple. We didn't cut that. What we did, and I explained in the answer yesterday, and and there should be correspondence delivered to him today in regards to that matter. What happened is that we had a number of programs or projects where money was being spent that came to an end, and that's where the money is from.
The honourable member for Richmond on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, for the information of the House, the Minister of Justice saw fit to put out a cheap press release today accusing me of being misleading. And ironically, it comes from the NDP caucus office, not from the Department of Justice, which I think tells you how much weight should be given to this release. But let's go back to the Red Room, where the justice estimates were held. And let's go on Thursday, April 28, 2011, where I said, am I correct here in seeing that for the grants of discretionary crime prevention and restorative justice, you've cut that by 55.4%? That's over half of the budget for crime prevention that has been cut. Is that correct? And the answer that we received, first off, any cut to crime prevention is a sad day. However, you have to make decisions and you have to take some action. I'm a big proponent of crime prevention, but we have to live within our means and we have to make good, wise choices with the dollar we put in. So I asked the Minister of Justice, when I said that this government cut crime prevention funding by 55.4%, exactly how was that misleading?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And there's a number of points that he made there in his question. I thank him for the question. First off, I didn't want to, on the issue of doing the press release, which clearly answers some of the questions that he put forward. I did it through the caucus office because I didn't want to really waste my office's time because we've answered it several times to him. And therefore, the answer was given, and in that when the member makes false accusations in the paper, they do need to be responded to. But just to give some clarity to some points is that when a project comes to an end, is that party over there saying that we take taxpayers' money and spend it on a program just because we did it in the past. But let me point out that this department has spent money on Safer Communities Neighbourhoods program, that the municipal police and the RCMP funding has been maintained for officers. The domestic violence court pilot project in Sydney has gone ahead. Civilian-led investigative unit has gone forward. Extra staff and equipment at Burnside has been put in place. A new correction facility in Pictou County is going ahead. Good legislation dealing with body armor. Mr. Speaker, I could go on and on and on about the things that this department has done. We have been constructive and achieved many things, and this member would do well to look at it.
The Honourable Minister for Richmond on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians are demanding that this government invest in strategies to put an end to the violent crime that's taking place in this province, to put an end to the shootings, to the stabbings, and to the murders that we are seeing place. Last night we heard it from Halifax Regional Council. Mr. Speaker, the facts are this minister had an opportunity to take $475,000 and put it in anti-crime strategies to make Nova Scotia streets safer. Instead, he chose to send it to the Minister of Finance rather than reinvest it in his own department. So I ask the minister again, why did you allow a 55.4% cut in anti-crime strategies at a time when so much violence is taking place in this province?
Order, please. Again. I don't know how I'm going to get this point across again. I mean, I know we're going to keep working on it, but it's coming to the point that, I said that, in all Westminster-based parliaments, please start using, the third person or going through the chair and stop using the word you. So I will now go to the Minister of Justice for his answer. The Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And once again, I'd like to point out that my colleague across there would rather create fear rather than to take the responsibility in the community to speak positively about things that are happening. Mr. Speaker, may I continue?
Please do.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I made an announcement on the civil forfeitures, and you can't make the link that if you take the assets and the resources away from the criminals, that the behavior will go down. He can't make the connection between the violence and the money. It's unfortunate that he's limited in his ability to comprehend that concept, but we will work overtime with him to make sure he gets the information.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Community Services. Mr. Speaker, on February 17th, I sent a letter to the Minister of Community Services expressing concern over the lack of day programming for individuals with severe physical and cognitive disabilities. Now, I would like to thank the Minister for her response, and her letter included a list of adult service centres which provide day programming for persons with disabilities. The Minister said, quote, "Currently, there are several centres that offer day programming for individuals with high needs ranging from mobility issues, nonverbal, vision issues, require mechanical lifts, and behavioural issues," unquote. The Minister did not, however, outline which specific centres provide services for individuals with severe needs. So, Mr. Speaker, would the Minister of Community Services please name a specific or specific centres which provide these services to individuals with severe needs?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The day programs in the province are very important for the people with disabilities. It's one area that unfortunately there hasn't been concentration of funding over the years, and therefore this government has put in funding. The last 2 weeks ago, we made an announcement to increase the dollars into day programs, because some of the areas, as the member would know, that we do need to focus on are the areas where people have higher needs, and to be able to provide them with those services. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's like this. I wrote a letter to the Minister asking her about a case with somebody with severe disabilities The minister sent back a list of adult service programs and or service centres, and not a single one on that list actually provides the services which were required by this individual, or which I wrote the letter to the minister about. Mr. Speaker, when the constituent in question, Ms. Shelley Maxwell, read the minister's letter, she called them all. And she responded, quote, "I find it interesting that the directory of adult service centres that were listed are ones that we have already been in touch with, and none are in a position to accept individuals like Megan," unquote. Mr. Speaker, the minister will remember from the letter that Megan is tube-fed, non-verbal, and has no access to day programming, and as a result is forced to be at home most days. Mr. Speaker, will the minister acknowledge that there are significant gaps in the current system for individuals with severe disabilities, and the list that she sent did not address the question that the constituent was asking about?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The important piece of knowledge that the honourable member has to realise is that there are issues out there with day programs because of a lack of investment over the years, and we're working very hard to make a difference. We are meeting with day program people, and every one of the day program service providers that we have in the province looks at each case individually, and there is no problem for this member to come to our department and to discuss that with us if the situation has been that this particular individual has not been able to find the services that are needed. Then we can look at that and see what we can do, and what we do is we provide a list, because each day service provider has different programs that they offer, and so they need to have the information. That's why I provided the list, because then they can go and talk to them to see if that particular service is available for their loved ones. Thank you.
The honourable member for Dartmouth on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I find the minister's answer quite frankly baffling, because the whole point of my letter was very clear to the minister that the reason we were writing is because there was a problem that we could not find the services. And so we did go back to the department, and the minister's department's answer was, put Megan in a nursing home. Well, Mr. Speaker, that is unacceptable. This is a family that wants to care for their daughter at home. All they're looking for is support and day programs, yet this minister's department seems more willing to spend more money and have the government spend more money putting this young woman in a nursing home instead of providing the necessary services. So, Mr. Speaker, will the minister commit to finding a solution that offers Megan and people like Megan day programming without forcing them into nursing homes?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, one point I would like to make is that most members in this House, when they have an issue, they have come and they have spoken to me personally. And I have taken every step that is possible to work with each and every member here. So instead of sending a letter, if he's not happy with the response, he can come and talk to me about it. That is the adult way of doing business to help others, not stand in this House and rag on somebody about programs and such that we are working really, really hard to make a difference. Come talk to me and let's find out what the solution is. We're a solution-oriented government. He may not be, but we are.
The Honourable Member for Digby Annapolis.
I find some long-winded answers from over there, Mr. Speaker. But I only want a short one. If I got time here to get one short answer from the Minister of Energy, I'll be pleased. Mr. Speaker, recently we've been told that hundreds of turbines, tidal turbines, can be installed in the next few years in the Bay of Fundy. This is good for the environment, but also good for economic development. If the provincial government supports the municipality of Digby in its hard work to make this area the port of choice for maintenance on these turbines. My question to the minister is, does the NDP government support Digby in its efforts to become the port of choice for tidal turbine maintenance over St. John, New Brunswick?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for the question. And certainly, the Fundy offshore tidal project is very important to this province, and you know, it's a huge investment by a number of companies to look at tidal power in the Bay of Fundy, where more water comes in there than all the rivers in the world, and it gives a tremendous opportunity to invest in our tidal energy. But Digby is a beautiful area of our province, and I would encourage the honourable member to work with our department to make that happen.
The honourable member for Digby Annapolis on your
I'll direct this question to the Minister of Economic Development, Mr. Speaker. My question for the Minister is, will the Minister of Economic Development push this initiative at the Cabinet table and help to bring much-needed economic development to the Digby and surrounding areas in this new tidal initiative?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Mr. Speaker, to you, the answer is yes, I will.
Thank you. The time allotted for oral questions put by members to ministers has elapsed. I will now recognize the honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise today on a point of privilege. During the question period and some preliminary comments that were made by the Minister of Education about me, I found to be personal, found them to be uncalled for, and I found them to have no bearing on the question that was asked or the response that should have been given. So, Mr. Speaker, I would ask you, as Speaker, to review those comments in the context in which they were given and to rule on the appropriateness of those comments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I will do that. I will take that under advisement and ask my staff to look into it and get back to you at my earliest convenience. I will now recognize the host leader for the official opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call resolution number 930?
Resolution number 930. The leader of the official opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today and speak to resolution. Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. Please rise today to speak to resolution 930. And I'll just read the operative clause, which says, therefore, it be resolved that the members of the House of Assembly urge the NDP government to reconsider their deep cuts to public education in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, many times during this session, members of our caucus has asked questions of whether it's the Minister of Education or the Premier about the education cuts. And the Premier and the Minister will often say that, Mr. Speaker, we have not cut funding to education on a per pupil basis. The fact that our budget is actually meeting the number of kids that are dropping out of the system, Mr. Speaker. What I found rather interesting, Mr. Speaker, since as long as I've been in the House, since 2003, Madam Speaker, since I've been here since 2003 and subsequent years, we've had many debates about the hog formula. And as all of us know in this House, the basis of the hog formula is to deal with declining populations, and particularly across many of the rural areas. And I know the Minister of Education and I share the same school board. And oftentimes when we're visiting that board, which meets with the MLAs from that area, the hog formula has been part of the discussion, as it was with previous members. And they talked about how the formula there, quite frankly, punished them. Even though they had a declining number, they were losing money out of that, because that's the way the system worked, and the hog formula wouldn't respond to helping them offset the number of kids that were dropping out. Mr. Speaker, so when the Minister and the Premier stand up in this House and suggest that the cuts that are being made to education were based on declining enrollment, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, those cuts are in addition to what the hog formula has already dealt with. As every member in this House knows, and every member in this House who deals with their school boards and schools in their community would recognize. One of the disheartening things, and I have taken an opportunity over the last couple of weeks, really intensive in the since last Wednesday, to send a letter out to every teacher in the province And I've been getting responses back, and oftentimes they're referring to, quite frankly, we're talking about a student as if there's some benign object, not recognizing the uniqueness of each of them, not recognizing each specific need of each of the children that are being put into the classroom. And when we stand up and we talk and we justify the reduction in education based on the very fact that students are going out of the system, we're not recognizing the need that is in the classroom. Madam Chair, when as all of us in this House were in classrooms across this province at various times, we would recognize the demand that is on a classroom teacher has increased substantially since many of our own days as being students or going in there as parents. Madam Chair, I've had an opportunity to really only see the education system from two folds. One, as a parent, and one, obviously, in the role that I'm playing today, where I go in and get an opportunity to go into the school system. But I can tell you the demands on the classroom teacher over the number of years that my children were in the school system, and Madam Chair, my youngest child just graduated last year. But from the time he entered the public education system until he graduated, the demands on the classroom teacher became tenfold in that short period of time. And when we look at funding education solely based on the number of children in the system, we have lost sight of the fact that we have put so many more pressures on the system. We have asked them not only to become educators, we're asking them to become social workers, we're asking them to deal with all of the other challenges that are being faced by children and by families across this province. And without the proper supports in the system, they are doing the best they can. But Madam Chair, I would submit it is an impossible task that we are asking. And I believe, based on these cuts, and quite frankly, I believe based on the fact that we are going to cut reading recovery, we're going to cut math mentors, we're going to cut literacy programs, it is only going to become that much more difficult. Madam Chair, one of the interesting things that kept coming back to me as I was speaking to educators, and it was a very simple request that they were looking for, was they were looking for a vision for education. They said, you know, perhaps before we start determining whether we make what the cuts are going to be, why don't we look at where we want to be in 5 and 10 years? And they were quite hopeful, as I was, and I made reference to this when Dr. Ben Levin was asked to do a report and asked to make recommendations to the government on the direction of where we might want to go. And Madam Chair, Dr. Levin's report is not in yet. And yet boards are being cut, reading recovery programs are being cut, math mentors are being cut. The very basis, the very supports in a classroom that are being required, that are there to help those struggling students, those young students who with a little support very early on in their education are going to get an opportunity to flourish through the public education system, going to get an opportunity to seek out their chosen profession, to seek out their post-secondary institution of choice and go and build a productive life here in Nova Scotia. Madam Chair, some of these students will be lost, and that's just a simple fact. They will not get an opportunity to reach their full potential because we are not providing them with the kind of supports that are required. I took the opportunity after the debate here in education. I asked a number of, the minister was with me the day that I encouraged all members of the Valley Caucus, as I'd like to call them, we're meeting with our school board, to go out and ask and go into a classroom, and I accepted the challenge, and I went in, and I've been into a number of them, but I specifically went to Annapolis East Elementary School. One school that, quite frankly, has done a tremendous job dealing with children with autism. It's people from not only across this province, but across this country. We're moving into our community to provide supports, much of which were created in a program that was created in the Valley Board by Ms. Kim Hume, who's retired now, but well known across this province for advocacy around supports for children with autism. And when I had an opportunity to go into the schools, and in particular into Annapolis East, and have them talk about the support changes that will be coming, they're quite fearful of the direction on where they're going, where we'll end up going. And Madam Chair, what they're discouraged by, the very programs that we're talking about in terms of reading recovery, the math mentors, they believe, and I believe teachers across this province believe, that we are actually capturing that young student who we can actually provide with a little support in grade 1 and some additional support surrounding grade 1, an opportunity at a very, very bright future. Boards like the South Shore has added to the reading recovery program. They've added around the math mentors. If you look at what has taken place in Chignecto board, they've done the same thing. Madam Chair, what this government has done is pulled out from underneath them the very foundation of the programs that they had built, and that was reading recovery. It is from that which is disappointing, because that, it appears to them, and quite frankly appears to parents and to us, and I won't speak for everybody on this side of the House, but I'll speak for myself. It appears to me that this was very much based on looking at a budget item and not looking at educational outcomes at the end of the day. Because if it was about educational outcomes, we would have looked at what's taking place in some parts of this province and seen the successes that has been built around that program. If it wasn't about a budget item, we wouldn't. Then what we do is we allow individual boards across this province to pay the fee of around $3,000 on average to continue to apply reading recovery to their students, because they know their students, quite frankly, better than the Minister of Education knows them, than anyone sitting in the Department of Education or any one of us. What they've asked for is the flexibility to provide a program that they know that works for their students, and they can prove it, Madam Chair, because listed down in front of them are the statistics. And what we're replacing it with is a framework that is yet to be fully developed and has no evidence to back it up. And they're saying to us, as a professional group of teachers and professors, you're asking us to give up on evidence-based and go on a wing and a prayer, hoping that someone in the Department of Education knows what they're doing. That is not the direction I believe we should be heading, Madam Chair, and I would encourage this government to reconsider these cuts.
Thank you. I now recognize the Honourable Minister of Education.
Speaker, thank you. It is my pleasure yet again to speak on public education and the sound, common sense decisions government is making to preserve and protect the quality of education in Nova Scotia. The resolution states that the future of the Nova Scotia economy depends upon providing the best education possible for our young people, and I couldn't agree more. I want to thank the member opposite for an opportunity to have my comments linked to the members opposite's party website. It gives me another opportunity to confirm my commitment to education. This is a government that cares enough to do the work that needs to be done in the best interest of the children in this province. I care, we care, so I thank you for this opportunity. Quality education is, of course, a priority of this government, just as it is for any government occupying this side of the House. It is absolutely ridiculous to assert that any government would not place the education and success of its students high among its priorities. I think what people listening today need to understand that these are challenging times for the province, and decisions must be made to protect those public services that we hold dear, health and education, just to name two. Nova Scotians want a strong public school system. They also want a government that shows leadership and can deliver on that priority, and do so by spending our limited resources wisely. We have twin challenges facing this province: limited financial resources and, unfortunately, a dramatically changing demographic which has slowly but surely eroded student enrollments over the last 40 years. In that time, Nova Scotia has gone from a high of 215,000 students in our public school systems to barely more than 128,000 students today. Over the past decade, Madam Speaker, we have lost almost 30,000 students. While our costs have climbed, our teacher numbers and our administrations grew 42%. Over the next 3 years, we are going to lose close to 7,000 more students. This is an unsustainable path. We cannot continue to maintain high levels of staffing for fewer and fewer students. We must take steps to ensure our considerable investment in education, $1.05 billion this year, matches the numbers and needs of all of our students. The decisions we are making today will ensure the long-term viability of public education, Madam Speaker. These budget decisions that we have made and that have been passed by this legislature are, of course, challenging to boards and for our teaching and school support staff. But they are manageable, and I congratulate boards on the work they are doing to help us right-size our public school system. We have done our utmost to make sure that the funding to boards is reasonable, reflects our declining enrollment, and protects children and learning. To illustrate this point, Madam Speaker, I want to highlight a couple of facts. First, our per-student funding for public education continues to rise, increasing this coming year from $10,126 to $10,372. Secondly, our student-to-teacher ratio is still the lowest in a generation, just at 13.4 to 1. A decade ago, the student-teacher ratio stood at 16.5 to 1, and in 1980, it was 17 to 1. So, Madam Speaker, we are headed in the right direction, and our decisions are sound. Our critics, of course, are probably going to say our per-student funding is still behind that of a richer province. Madam Speaker, Nova Scotians recognize and place a high priority on education, and they can take a backseat to no one on that. The most recent Statistic Canada release issued December the 20th in 2010 is very interesting. Nova Scotia compares relatively well on spending per capita and is at the high end for proportion of the GDP spent on education. Nova Scotians contribute more than 4% of their gross domestic product on public schools, higher than Ontario, Quebec, BC, Saskatchewan, and even Alberta, which spends the lowest, less than 3%, according to the CAT-STAN data. The fact is, Madam Speaker, it is not how much money spends on education, it is how wisely you spend your money and making decisions that are focused on supporting the best interests of all of our students. The funding we are providing boards to achieve a reasonable balance between the need for restraint while providing boards to live within their means to maintain their quality. As for our practice, we will work closely with boards to ensure that at the end of the day, that the best decisions for students and for public education are within the current financial and social reality. We will work together to resolve this and to work with the best interest of the children in this province. Student success and quality education come first. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to this afternoon.
Thank you. The honourable member for Argyle.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Very pleased to stand and speak for a few moments on this resolution. I still only have the 10, unfortunately. This resolution before us talks to the education cuts that school boards, students are having to face the reality of in our system today. And I want to start with a quick quote, and the quote I think is attributed to the President of the United States. And you know, education, if you're cutting education or doing some education, it's pretty much sort of like trying to fly an airplane without the engines. If you don't have a good education system, everything else around it falls apart. And the feeling is that the cuts that we're seeing by this NDP government are really cutting at the engines of the airplane that is Nova Scotia. The other thing that we looked at and truly find opposition to is, you know, who would cut education first? I mean, if you're really trying to balance a budget, who would look at the public education system first? Apparently, we did find that group, and that is the NDP that governs this province. Madam Speaker, what happened here, too, is that in the middle of asking for these tremendous cuts, you know, 2, 3, 4% in some school boards cases across this province. This province, this Minister of Finance, this Premier went and posted a surplus of $460 million. So you're asking for a cut on one side, yet you're posting a surplus on the other. So when you're talking to teachers, educators, you're talking to parents, and you're saying, sorry, we're not going to be able to offer that service anymore, they look at you and say, well, geez, didn't you just post a $460 million surplus? Couldn't you have used some of those dollars to go towards public education in some way or another, instead of asking for the cuts that are before us today? I listened with interest to the minister's comments, and we always tend to get a new set of numbers or a new way to try to justify this inaccuracy when it comes to our education system. You know, all of a sudden we're hearing of student ratios. We're hearing about percentages to GDP of a 4% per GDP. Madam Speaker, what that really does is that they're really searching for a justification for this travesty that's going to be continuing in our education system. If we go back 10 years or more, we find an education system that was in turmoil, an education system that was still reeling from huge cuts by the Liberal government of the time, the early 90s, one that really hadn't adjusted itself from those early retirements and trying to find their way. So we had outcomes in this province 10 years ago that weren't very good. Kids were not doing well in math. They weren't doing good in reading. They were, I don't know where, on science. And you know, quite honestly, as a parent today, many of the things that we were hearing were really embarrassing, that our system was performing in the way that it was performing. And adopting new methodologies, adopting new programs, finding ways to help students, investments were made in our education system. Investments that I believe have turned some very good results when it comes to how our children are performing in comparison to other provinces in many of those subject matters. The results, in my mind, speak for themselves. That's why the government of the day made those investments. Madam Speaker, we are looking forward to tomorrow when Dr. Levin does bring forward his recommendations on the education system, what we could do better, what we could fix, what we could change. Because ultimately, this government tends to do a lot of study. They tend to look at a lot of recommendations, and I'm hoping that many of the recommendations that will be in it will be to stop this craziness of trying to cut our education budget or trying to balance a budget on the backs of students. This happens tomorrow, and all I can say is I hope the recommendations that we see within them to be realistic and to be recommendations that this government will follow. But we will hold our comments on that until tomorrow, till we see the full scope of Dr. Levin's recommendations. When we got started this discussion, the leader of the Liberal Party talked about the hog formula, and still today I would love it if somebody could really give us a full accounting of what the hog formula does for us. But we know, even from what we all know of the hog formula, is that declining enrollment is a huge part of the way that formula calculates the dollars that school boards will be receiving in order to offer educational services to them. The HOG formula has made the adjustments along the way for the number of students that are held in those areas, the schools that they must maintain, the busing system, and the geography of those boards are all held within that formula. So for the minister to stand here and say, you know, there's a huge decline in enrollment in this province, and we can't debate that. The numbers are speaking for themselves. But what this really shows is that we are cutting education far beyond where we need to be cutting without impacting the outcomes of these students. You know, already today, we've heard many cuts, very unpalatable cuts that school boards are going to have to be doing in order to meet the budget lines of the department. We've already heard of the Pathways and Transitions program here at the Halifax Regional Board that's going to have to be cut. We've talked at end about reading recovery, and you know, for the small amount of $2 million, and to put the whole system into a bit of a flux on what the new programs are going to be and how they're going to be rolled out and what the response is going to be for students is a tremendous one. You know, why would we go down this road? We're hearing every day of new teacher layoffs in different boards. Because don't forget, Madam Speaker, that every dollar, you know, 80% of every dollar in this province goes to people, goes to pay for nurses, and goes to pay for doctors, and goes to pay for snowplow drivers. You know, continue on the list of what we pay for in this province in our civil service. So, Madam Speaker, any cut that really happens is that we end up losing people. We end up losing teachers in this particular case because of the cut to education. And I can tell you that as a parent and as a husband to a teacher, you can understand the angst that this creates on the school level when you start losing teachers. Because today we're asking far too much of our teachers because of the added responsibilities that these individuals, these educators need to put on themselves. It's too much to ask to start to change the teacher ratio because of the disabilities that we're seeing, because of the autism, because of ADHD, because of different disabilities. So, Madam Speaker, what I can say is I thank the member for bringing this forward, and I can say to the government is that you know, we still will believe that you're definitely rowing in the wrong pond on this one, that you really need to rethink cutting education, because education does talk to our future and does talk to the economic engine of Nova Scotia. So thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I now recognize the honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise today and speak to resolution at 9:30. And we have heard from earlier speakers. Obviously, the main issue here is the cuts to public education, and therefore be it resolved, all members of the House of Assembly urge the NDP government to reconsider their deep cuts to public education in Nova Scotia. And all of the speakers from both opposition parties have reiterated that. We have started talking about that back in the fall of 2010, when there was some rumblings out there about cuts to education, and so it's nothing new for the minister or for the government to hear this resolution and to hear members on this side of the House speak to it. Unfortunately, Madam Speaker, we have not seen any indication that the government listened. And that is what is making us on this side of the House passionate about education, because we care about kids, we care about their outcomes, we care about their future, And we know that, and it's not from us, it's from economists who have said during times of tough economic conditions, the last place that a government would cut would be in education. And they say that all around the world. I mean, that's an accepted premise on which you would build any kind of a budget, is that you don't cut education dollars when you have times of economic downturn. So here we have a government that has recognized and repeated many times the economic conditions in the province. And yet they would accept, the minister would accept, and the government would support a cut to the funding for public education. And initially, the minister told us that this was a budget decision. And I think we believe that to be true, because immediately upon announcing the Reading Recovery, a discontinuation of that program, immediately we heard that it was going to save $7 million. Well, it wasn't long before the outcry came, and it continues. And the outcry was, how can you take a program that has high success rates all across this province, it's recognized internationally, how can you take that program and cut it? So then the response back was, well, we will find a replacement program for Reading Recovery, and it will cost $5 million. Nobody knew what the program was. Nobody knew what human resources you would need for that, what material resources you would need for that, but it was very quickly tagged with a $7 million price tag. So if you go back to the original decision that the minister said was a budget decision, we're now down to $2 million. And the impact that that decision is having and will continue to have on this province, on the education of our kids and on our public school system is worth a lot more than $2 million. You can't, Madam Minister or Madam Speaker, put a price tag on, someday, put a price tag on the cost of education. You can't put a price tag on whether students learn to read or not. We have a responsibility to ensure that we do everything possible in our public school system so that students will learn to read. So what was originally a budget decision to save $7 million quickly became a $2 million. And, you know, people gave the minister the benefit of the doubt, and they said, well, she is talking about a replacement program for Reading Recovery, so let's see what it is. It was going to be research-based, it was going to be evidence-based, it was going to be one-on-one, it was going to be early. All of the criteria that you find in the Reading Recovery was going to be part of the new program. Well, Madam Speaker, we waited, and we waited. And on August 26th, we had an opportunity, we thought, to get an answer. So those of us who were interested, along with the media, went out to the announcement. And the announcement was to be the replacement for Reading Recovery. And I can tell you, Madam Minister, it was nothing but a huge disappointment. The announcement fell flat. There was no detail in this announcement. There was a document called Succeeding in Reading. And as one former principal said, it is, you know, quite like a term paper. And when you read through it, there is not one thing in this document that you could argue. It's full of motherhood statements about reading and about literacy. It talks about early identification, which we currently do in our school system, and we know how valuable that is. It talks about early intervention, which we currently do, and we know how valuable that is. It talks about collaboration, teachers working with other teachers. And you know, Madam Speaker, we've been doing that in our public schools for years. It's already happening. But this document talks about collaboration, talks about consultation. It talks about teamwork. It talks about professional development. It talks about intense one-on-one support. It talks about the guiding principles of learning. It talks about small group instruction. It talks about flexibility in delivery. It even, Madam Speaker, talks about the strands of learning: reading, viewing, speaking, listening, communicating. It talks about those strands. It's a great document about what's important in literacy. It's a great summary of what we are currently doing. It talks about motivating students to learn. Well, the first thing you learn when you go into a teacher education program as a student is, how do you motivate your kids to learn? It's in this document. It talks about the passion that we want kids to have for reading. And as I said, those are all honorable, commendable statements about reading and literacy. But, Madam Speaker, there's not one thing in this document that would suggest that we're going to be doing anything differently than we currently are. Except I will give credit. We're now not using the word reading recovery teachers. We're talking about early literacy teachers. And Madam Speaker, that is the only difference in this document that you can find from what we are currently doing to what we expect we might be doing with a new $5 million Succeeding in Reading program, which is supposed to be implemented in September. So, Madam Speaker, it was a huge disappointment. It was something that people had expected would be maybe the answer to the lowest 20% of students in grade 1 who are struggling and who were helped through reading recovery. Maybe it will be something, as the minister said, that will reach far more children. It's not here, Madam Speaker, and that is what's disappointing, and that is what's causing anxiety, because people were waiting, they were hoping, and when school opens in September, Madam Speaker, and parents bring their kids to school, and they're looking for the supports that they currently have, they're going to be anxious. Teachers are going to be anxious. What this does is simply talk about what we are currently doing, and in speaking with members from school boards, and I don't mean elected school boards, I mean people in the trenches, people who are making a difference. Their comment is, we are concerned about the quality of programming that we will be able to deliver within this framework, because one of the key components of the current program has been yanked away, and that is the early intervention intensity of reading recovery. And there's nothing in this to replace it. You know, this document, the minister talks about early identification. Absolutely critical to helping kids learn to read. But we already are doing 2 instruments that are used in our public schools to identify early on kids who are having difficulty. This document identifies them, but guess what? We are already doing them, so they are not new. Talked about early intervention, and you know, the minister said that she hoped that this program would reach more students. But if you look at the early intervention and the early intensive short-term literacy initiatives that have been developed by boards and are currently in place, was addressing students in P to 3. Those programs are already there. So that's nothing new. What we wanted to get was, if reading recovery for some reason is something that the minister can't support, then we were hoping that there would be some other program that she could support that would do exactly what reading recovery is doing. You know, another comment, or another, I guess, a statement in this has to do with looking at effective instructional strategies. Well, again, that's what teachers do every day. They look at how can they have a whole menu of strategies which they believe will help students learn. And then the last one that I want to comment on is joint responsibility. And this document says that the education of these students will be the joint responsibility of the classroom teacher and the early literacy teacher. And you know, Madam Speaker, joint responsibility, there is one person who's responsible for the education of our kids in our schools. The classroom teacher has always assumed the responsibility, but the classroom teacher has been very open to working with other experts in the field. And we have teams in our schools. We have teams who work together to look at how you can better improve the instruction and the learning for students. And I can't understand how a minister or any educator could suggest that having collaborative teams working together to plan for programs for students is something new. We have program planning teams, we have site-based planning teams, we have grade level meetings, we have transition teams, we have professional learning teams. Those have existed in our public schools for years, and they are there to provide support for the classroom teacher. And on those teams, we have many, many people who participate. But the bottom line of all of this, Madam Speaker, is that there is nothing concrete. It's a $5 million document. It says absolutely nothing about what will improve learning for students in our schools. And for that reason, Madam Speaker, we are asking that this government reconsider the devastation that will happen in our public schools because the funding to support students in our schools has been cut. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The time allotted for Resolution 930 has expired. I now recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Deputy House Leader, done that. I now call Resolution 944.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Thank you. I now call Resolution 944. I recognize the honourable member for Richmond.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak on this resolution. Allow me to read it briefly. Whereas justice is a significant issue in Nova Scotia, a concern made greater with the 7 murders in the province already this year. And whereas since March there have been 16 shootings in Halifax Regional Municipality alone, and whereas the NDP government cut crime prevention programs by 55% in this year's budget, therefore be resolved, the House of Assembly condemn the NDP government's cut to crime prevention programs and demand a renewed focus on the prevention of crime in Nova Scotia. Now, Madam Speaker, I believe the facts are clear now, although there's been certainly an attempt to muddy the facts in the last number of days by the Department of Justice, by the Minister, by some political staff, to challenge some of the comments and conclusions I have reached. One being that there was a 55% cut in crime prevention programs. Where did I possibly get that number? Well, as has already been stated in this House, I got it from the Minister of Justice, who provided me with those figures. In fact, it's very detailed information. It says reduced grants, discretionary, crime prevention, restorative justice, reduction of $475,000. The program budget for 2010-2011 is $857,000, and the percent reduction is 55.4%. So those are the facts. But then the minister said, no, the member for Richmond has it wrong. It's not a cut to crime prevention, it's cuts to other programs. He talked about grandfathering programs coming to an end, everything else. So we said, well, maybe we're mistaken. Maybe that's possible. So we did the responsible thing. We did our research. We went back and we asked Hansard As you know, Madam Speaker, when the estimates are done in the Red Room, they are not transcribed by Hansard as they are here in the legislature on a daily basis. But if you request it, they will transcribe them for you. So we said, what exactly did the Minister of Justice say when we had the debate on this question? So before we had the opportunity to bring that to his attention, today the Minister saw fit, with the assistance of NDP political staff, to put out a press release. And that press release, the headline is, Justice Minister asks Sampson to stop misleading public. Well, that's quite a statement for the Minister of Justice to make, quite an accusation for him to make. In fact, the release goes even further, and it actually says that I was reckless and irresponsible. Again, very serious accusations for a minister to make. Ironically, as was pointed out today, this release didn't come from the Department of Justice, where you have independent, professional media relations people who work. Because I'm sure if they would have looked at this, they would have said, well, first of all, it's inaccurate. Because basically what he's saying, what the Mayor for Richmond said is true. He's just repeated what the Minister of Justice told him. So they chose, Communications Nova Scotia, not to send us out. Instead, it comes out from the NDP caucus office. So what kind of press release come from the NDP caucus office? Political ones. So this is nothing but a political smear by the Minister of Justice, which I have to say, surprised me. But then again, if I were the Minister of Justice at a time when Nova Scotians are seeing increasing violent crime, and I had been forced by the Minister of Finance to cut $5 million from my department, including almost $500,000 from crime prevention initiatives, I'd probably be slightly upset as well. Not sure if I'd make the smears that were made in that release, but so be it. I would certainly be upset. So that's understandable. Because what we were able to show today is when I raised the issue with the Minister in estimates, when I referred to them as cuts to crime prevention programs, the Minister acknowledged that. And let me just point out again today, while I have some time here, which is not very much, Madam Speaker, but first of all, the answer from the Minister was, first off, any cut to crime prevention is a sad day. These are his words. However, you have to make decisions and you have to take some action. I'm a big proponent of crime prevention, but we have to live within our means and the rest. This is what the Minister of Justice said. So this is what he accuses me of being misleading on, using his own words, where he acknowledges a cut to crime prevention. So further than that, the Minister yesterday put out an opinion piece saying that all the investments he had made, not acknowledging the cuts that were made, talking about investments made in 2009, 2010. Well, that's not the budget that we're talking about. We're talking the budget for 2011, 2012, and that's where the cuts were made. So the Minister talked in the question period and referred to programs and everything else. I should point out, for the record, on April 28, Thursday, I asked the Minister for more detailed information about which exact programs were not being renewed. I should point out that the Minister has yet to provide that. So yesterday, after the Minister's responses in question period, where he again accused me of misleading and not providing the facts, I wrote to him personally and to his Deputy Minister and asked for him to provide me with a list of the programs in question and some explanation about his comments. As I stand here today, I have not received that information. So I believe I've done the responsible thing as a member of this House. Even though the Minister has accused me of being reckless and irresponsible, he had an opportunity to provide me with facts. He chose not to do so. Instead, focused his time on sending out a political smear press release. Instead, he could have been providing me details on behalf of his department to show us exactly which programs were not renewed, what groups were getting funding for anti-crime measures or for restorative justice, that the funding was no longer renewed. At the end of the day, we realized tough decisions have to be made, and the Minister of Justice had to make tough decisions. But to now suddenly try to convince Nova Scotians that the cuts made were not to crime prevention programs is irresponsible on his part. And he can send out all the opinion pieces he wants. I think he saw the reaction from the media today where they basically mocked his press release when we showed them exactly what the Minister had to say in the Red Room during estimates. There's nothing worse in politics than having your own words come back to haunt you. And that's what the Minister of Justice had happened today. I often heard government members saying we should do better research. I think this is a case where possibly the Minister of Justice should have asked his political staff, not his staff in his department, because they weren't responsible for that press release, but maybe his political staff could have done better research to see exactly what it was that the Minister of Justice said. At the end of the day, Madam Chair, we now have HRM Council last night who spoke about the issue of violent crime in the municipality and how it is not normal, although the Minister of Justice will tell us it's cyclical and that it's going to go away on its own. They don't believe that, and we don't believe that. What we have asked, which I think is a responsible thing to do, which is something which I believe the Minister of Transportation, when he was justice critic on this side, would have asked as well. Is there a strategy? Is there a plan? Is there a focus on dealing with the increase in crime? Does it involve money? Possibly. Does it involve new initiatives? Possibly. And when we were asked today, a fair question, the media said, well, what would you suggest? I said, well, very good question. I said, the problem with that is how do you suggest a solution to a problem that the Minister of Justice says doesn't exist? So until we at least get an acknowledgement that it exists, until the Minister of Justice actually provides us with the information of which funding has not been renewed for restorative justice, for crime prevention initiatives, it's very difficult for us in opposition, not having access to all this information, to be able to bring forward some responsible suggestions to the Minister. I'm no expert in crime prevention, but I, along with Nova Scotians, realize there's a problem here. And I don't believe that those who are using illegal handguns and shooting are just in a cycle and that suddenly they're going to get it out of their system and stop doing it. Something needs to be done to address this. It is not normal. Nova Scotians don't want to see it in HRM, and they don't want to see it in their communities. So we have to work as legislators to see what can be done to try to stop crime before it happens. Because unfortunately to date, everything the Minister of Justice has told us, crime has already happened. And his announcement this morning about seizing a forfeiture of the proceeds of crime assets, great initiative. It was passed in 2007. The courts upheld it in 2009. It took 2 years to get the announcement we had this morning. Long term, will it have a positive effect? We can all hope. Short term, will it stop the shootings taking place last week, the week before, or that might take place this week? It will not, which is why we need the Minister to acknowledge that there is a problem, that there needs to be an open discussion, which we're prepared to participate in, to try to make Nova Scotia streets safer for the benefits of all Nova Scotians, and certainly especially for the benefit of all of our children. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I now recognize the Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm happy to rise in my place and speak to this important issue. In fact, Madam Speaker, I welcome the opportunity to discuss the essential work done at the department. This is also an opportunity to clarify changes to this year's Justice Department budget. Madam Speaker, safety is what drives much of the work carried out at the Justice Department. Our work is integral to helping keep our cities, our communities, and our homes safe. One of the things that comes to the top of my mind to most people, or to myself or most people, is when they think about the Justice Department is making and enforcing of laws to keep us safe. Traditionally, law enforcement has been the main tool used to fight crime, to make sure people are held accountable for their actions. Our Public Safety Division provides policing services governance for this province. Through this division, we provide oversight, governance, and advice to police, private security services, and firearms license holders. I would like to advise that the additional officer program remains unchanged for this year. However, as any responsible government, as we go forward, we will continue to work collaboratively with our policing partners. We know that society and the world around us are changing quickly and constantly. Given this, it is clear that our policing programs must adapt to respond to the ever-changing world. Madam Speaker, I assure members of this House that work is ongoing to ensure that we have laws and that the law enforcement is in place to keep Nova Scotia safe. In recent months, some progress has been made with respect to public safety initiatives, including continued funding of the Safest Community Neighbourhoods Act, or known as SCAN. SCAN gives citizens the tool to take back their neighbourhoods and combat illegal activity. Continue funding of the Criminal Intelligence Service Nova Scotia, which provides intelligence relating to organized crime criminals throughout Nova Scotia. We are also creating a civilian-led unit to investigate serious incidents involving police. We're also investing $1.2 million of additional funding in domestic violence court. This pilot program will increase victim safety and help rehabilitate those who commit abuse. Most recently, today, in fact, Madam Speaker, we announced a new civilian forfeiture unit. This unit will help deter unlawful activity by allowing the province to sell seized assets acquired through criminal activity or used to engage in criminal activity. This unit will immediately begin working to take the profit out of crime, ensure people are not benefiting from their criminal activities, enhance community safety. Madam Speaker, there is a direct correlation between those carrying the guns and the money obtained by crime. It is more clear than ever that preventing and reducing crime is just as important as making and enforcing law to keep us safe. We work with policing partners and community leaders and groups to combat, reduce, and prevent crime. We are working to create opportunities for youth that will help them to make better life choices and steer away from crime. We continue to provide restorative justice operating grants to not-for-profit agencies across the province who administered the program. This crime reduction program holds youth accountable while providing an opportunity for healing for the victims and the community. This budget also saw funding fully protected for crime prevention activities. Our Lighthouse programs will continue to provide $240,000 in grants to community organizations across this province. This funding enables organizations to provide recreational, educational, cultural, and life skills programs for Nova Scotians. Our core funding, and I repeat, Madam Speaker, has not been cut one penny. Some of the projects include the Peer and Parents Peace Program in Sydney, Youth on the Radar Program in Halifax, the Name the Shame Project in Bridgewater, Maggie's Place Youth Programs in Cumberland County. We will also continue to support grassroots community programs, community crime prevention activities through the one-time crime prevention investment. This amount remains at a $40,000 annual investment. In fact, since 2009, the overall budget in areas relating to combating, reducing, and preventing crime has increased by over $5.2 million. At this time, Madam Speaker, I want to set the record straight. Recent claims that the Department of Justice cuts its crime prevention budget and made changes that will put additional pressures on police are simply not accurate. Let me tell you, Madam Speaker, what is accurate about the Department of Justice budget. We have taken on the hard work to get our fiscal house in order so that essential programs and services continue to be available for our families, our neighbours, our grandchildren, and beyond. Madam Speaker, that hard work includes finding savings within the Justice Department's budget. We reviewed all programs and services very carefully and made changes that would not critically affect the balance of the justice system. Public safety was at the forefront of every decision that was made. None of these measures we are taking will jeopardize public safety. In 2011-2012, we are making some reductions, but not to crime prevention initiatives or grants. Madam Speaker, let me be clear. The grants being reduced are restorative justice, I repeat again, one-time grants and general or discretionary grants. The restorative justice grants in question are non-operating in nature. They are one-time grants that provide extra support for different projects. The initiative is that these grants would eventually come to a natural end. We will continue to provide operating grants for not-for-profit agencies across the province who administer restorative justice. The crime reduction program holds youth accountable while providing an opportunity for healing for the victims and the communities. On that note of general or discretionary grants, through this funding, we support many different initiatives across the justice system, from the Uniform Law Conference to the Law Reform Commission and police or stakeholders events. While we are reducing the amount of overall funding available for these grants, we have not yet determined which initiatives will continue to receive funding. Madam Speaker, I also want to address claims that the reduction in some of our programs, specifically electronic supervision and bail supervision, will put additional pressures on police and keep them from the important work of fighting crime in our communities. I will start with the electronic supervision program. This reduction of almost 300,000 will be phased in over the next 3 years. This year's savings represent the elimination of 2 vacant positions. Electronic supervision uses GPS and wireless technology with an ankle bracelet to track offenders' movements on a 24-hour basis. Generally speaking, at any given time, there can be anywhere from 40 to 60 offenders enrolled in the program. Changes to this program will see the number of participants in the program capped at 35 for 213 capped by 35 by years 213 and 214. Are we making difficult decisions in an effort to keep get us be more fiscally responsible? Absolutely. The answer to that is yes. Are we doing things to put more pressures on police and the system to jeopardize public safety? Let me be clear, Madam Speaker, absolutely not. Madam Speaker, I should clarify that the electronic supervision is only one way that the offenders in the community are supervised. We also use traditional forms of supervision that include offenders reporting to probation officers. That other measures that are being talked about, Madam Speaker, is the bail supervision program. The elimination of this program will not generate additional work for the police. The program was initiated or intended to take some of the workload out of the correctional facility. It was great. It was created as an alternative to remand. However, it was minimally used by the courts. When implemented, the expectations of this program was about 40 people. Instead, we're down in the mid-teens. The program was reviewed, and it's not as effective as we'd like. Madam Speaker, we saved $170,000 in this. Madam Speaker, it is very important to note that these changes have helped us put in place new programs such as the Domestic Violence and Serious Incident Response Team. Before I close, I want to address the important issue that violence and guns in the community. Of course, Madam Speaker, I know that we are all concerned about this. Halifax Regional Police and our policing partners also share the concern. We welcome the opportunity to work in a collaborative manner to tackle these problems. I have always said that the Justice Department is here to support the police throughout the province. Madam Speaker, I see that my time is coming to an end and I have a few more pages there. However, I'll leave it at that. I think my message is clear. This department is doing its job.
Thank you. I now recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to say that it gives me great pleasure to get up and say a few words on this very important topic that was brought forward by my colleague from Richmond. Nova Scotians deserve and expect us to feel safe in their homes and their communities, Madam Speaker. They want to enjoy the peace of mind of knowing that their lives and their properties are protected. I want to begin by saying that we in the Progressive Conservative Caucus have nothing but respect for police officers. We recognize them as heroes who put their own safety on the line every day in order to keep the rest of us safe. And we want and expect government to provide police officers with the resources, the person power, and the equipment they need to do their jobs. Give them the tools they need to keep them safe and as well serve and protect Nova Scotians. The former government recognized the importance of police officers in our community. Our former government provided funding to hire an additional 250 police officers over 4 years to work across this province. And within the first 2 years, Madam Speaker, every municipality had at least one additional officer. Police officers in every municipality makes a difference in crime prevention and in catching those who commit crimes. The officers were allocated to working in partnerships with schools, communities, and among police forces. For example, funding was provided to hire more community school resource officers, serving as positive role models for young people to deter bullying and other abuse. They can also gain valuable information that they can limit and shut down drug, alcohol, and gang-related activities involving youth on and off school grounds. Mr. Speaker, we saw this week that this government has turned its back on this important initiative. We saw the elimination of 5 community liaison officers at the Cape Breton Victoria School Board. In one pen stroke, the government said they were okay with removing frontline workers who deal with bullying, limit drug and alcohol use,
and provide a sense of safety in schools in Cape Breton. They were okay with removing these professionals who prevent and deter crime in our schools and in our greater communities. The former government took crime prevention, deterrence and consequences for lawbreakers very seriously. Our approach was simple. We had effective laws, sufficient resources, and swift consequences. The former government, which we were part of, initiated the Safer Streets and Communities Task Force, a diverse group of Nova Scotians who gathered information from across the province on preventing and addressing crime. Our government approached crime prevention through significant serious law enforcement, coupled with programs that address the root causes of crime. Unfortunately, this government has taken another approach. The former government also initiated the Rewards for Major Unsolved Crimes program by offering cash rewards of up to $50,000 for information leading to the arrest and conviction of individuals responsible for major unsolved crimes. Our government signaled to Nova Scotians that we were serious about seeing justice done. That we understood that knowing the perpetrator of a serious crime may be walking on the streets of your community is unsettling for Nova Scotians. That getting tough on crime is a priority. It was the former government that had introduced and passed the Safer Communities and Neighbourhoods Act. It was legislation that ensured a citizen complaint could result in court orders to close locations that are a home to prostitution or illegal liquor, drugs, or gaming. The 2006 budget committed $540,000 to the creation of a public safety investigation unit to follow up on complaints and work with community members to address their concerns, Madam Speaker. That same year, the government passed an act to combat the production and use of illegal drugs. Legislation that allowed government to regulate the storage, transportation, distribution, and sale of ingredients, materials, and equipment used in the production and use of illegal drugs. That was meaningful crime prevention. In the same year, our government saluted fallen Nova Scotian heroes when we designated the third Sunday of each October as the Police and Peace Officers Memorial Day. It was the former government that acted decisively to prevent and deter crime by inducing the act to further discourage criminal offences involving the use of a motor vehicle. Because of this legislation, people who use a motor vehicle in the commission of an offence or who steal gas will lose their driver's license. Our government also developed the Proceedings of Crime unit that had the power to seize assets related to criminal activities or purchases from profits of crime. The enforcement of this law showed Nova Scotians that government cared about keeping their neighbourhoods safe, that our commitment to crime prevention wasn't a theory, but it was real action that they could count on, point to, and have in their neighbourhoods. Madam Speaker, Nova Scotia is a great place to live. It's a place where people know their neighbours, where they feel comfortable in their tight-knit communities and in their neighbourhoods. But government has a role, Madam Speaker, to play in preventing and deterring crime all over Nova Scotia. It takes thoughtful and innovative laws and policies like the ones that I have just outlined. It takes resources, and it takes respect for law enforcement officers, and it takes meaningful consequences for those who choose not to obey the law. I hope, Madam Speaker, I hope that the Minister remembers these important components and remembers the good work of the previous government as he moves forward with his very important job. Finally, Madam Speaker, I would like to say that when you see a police officer in your community, take the time to thank them for making your community a safer place for you and your family to live. Madam Speaker, with those few words, I will take my place and thank you for the time.
Thank you. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and pleased to rise today in my place and speak on Resolution 944. And since this resolution was tabled in the House, it's already out of date because since it was read, there's been a stabbing in Sydney. 4 students assaulted a police officer at Citadel High School in Halifax, and HRM Council has expressed their concern over the level of violence. In fact, Councillor Darren Fisher, East Dartmouth and the Lakes, asked yesterday the Council write to the Justice Minister to find out if there's anything that it can do to strengthen the justice system. And Madam Speaker, let's make no mistake about it. The 8 deaths, the 16 violent crimes, while they've happened here in HRM, the ones that we have documented, this is a provincial issue. All Nova Scotians take a look at what is happening in our capital city, because it has a reflection on the kind of life, the quality of life that we have an extremely high regard for. And when I think and when I look at the migration patterns that we've had in this province, with 13 counties losing population, and again, many of them are intra-migration, meaning they move to HRM. And I know, parents take a look at what's happening here because their sons and daughters are here in HRM in order to find work. So it is indeed an issue that resonates right across Nova Scotia, that we do have an issue around crime, around murder, and we need to be taking more action and addressing this problem. We know that prevention is a key to a peaceful and a safe environment. There are a number of us here who have spent time in the school environment where 1,000 young adults gather or more on a daily basis. And we know that a plan must be in place in order to have a peaceful and safe environment. And it's the same way in any of our communities. There must be prevention measures that are constantly being put into place, renewed, updated, and so that citizens can expect that they will have a safe environment to live in. I know that when we take a look at losing 55% of the prevention for crime, we know that has an impact. I've heard from my colleague from Cape Breton West about losing 5 liaison officers in schools in his area. Well, we lost 1 for the past school year, and I've heard from teachers and principals of the schools affected, and the loss of that position has made a difference this year, and it's a negative difference. That presence of the police officer, the kinds of trust that he gained with students, or she gained, in the case that I experienced while vice principal at West Kings High School. That position made a difference to the climate of our school. It made a difference in gathering information that then the police, the RCMP, and local police could use. Solid information about what may be going to happen in our community. Those police liaison officers have not been given the high regard by this government, and I am hearing about that, and I'm hearing about it throughout the Annapolis Valley, not just in the riding that I represent. We know at the current time the prescription drug issue and the general drug issue is getting great exposure about the valley, but we know it's also a problem throughout the province. And again, prevention here, preventive measures, again, can go a long way in dealing with this issue. And this is the area now that authorities, both the Kentville Police Department, the RCMP throughout the Valley, are taking a look at what are the next steps around prevention. And it's not going to be less human resources. It's going to take more human resources to address it both at the law enforcement, at the educational, and informing community leadership on how, in fact, they can deal with this issue. When it comes to restorative justice, we know that it doesn't stop every adolescent, every young adult from going on to perhaps further crimes. I have had a very, very positive experience with restorative justice. In the 3 cases that I had to go before the restorative justice panel to present the school's position on a crime issue that had taken place, and it so happened that they were all grade 9 students. And this is an area in which restorative justice can make a significant impact, a huge impression upon the adolescent and upon young adults. And let them see that connection, that when an incident takes place, whether it's in school or in our community, there are victims of crime. And it's not just the one victim that they bullied, that they had a fight with, that they stole from, whatever the issue may be, but it involves a whole lot of other people in those communities. And so restorative justice has a significant role to play in a solid prevention program. It again is another measure that has been proven over and over again to be successful. In all cases, no. But in many cases, it certainly does. And if we take a look, and I'm sure the minister has read the Nunn report, and if we take a look at the Nunn report, it is about a very common theme throughout the Nunn report is about preventing crime. It is about using a number of resources from different departments. In fact, 5 departments were identified as being able to play a key role in taking, again, adolescents, young adults, and in particular at the junior high level, and putting the resources in place, the kind of mentoring and coaching that would link the child causing a disturbance, behavior problems in school, with his home and with his community or her community. And so, you know, we should not dismiss the significance of the Nunn report. It has been taken and it is used in other provinces across Canada. It has enormous power to change the climate in our schools and in our communities. And we must give it the kind of resources, not take 55% out of prevention programs. There will be a price to pay for that, and we'll start to see it over the next years unless there is a reversal of some of the dismissing of those programs as this budget has caused. You know, in our province, the demographic is skewed tremendously towards the 50 and over population, and they are looking at what this government is doing to create and to allow safe communities to exist. This is the older population, this is the retirement population, and you know, whether it's you know, Amherst or Halifax or Aylesford or any little community of Nova Scotia, they want to live with a high degree of safety and know that there are programs working to allow for more peaceful communities to exist, because that's what that population perhaps desires the most. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I now recognize the official opposition House Leader.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. That concludes the Liberal Party's agenda for today and Opposition Day. I'd now like to turn it back to the Government House Leader for tomorrow's business.
Thank you. I recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, after the daily routine and question period, Madam Chair, we will go into bills for second reading, which are bills 30, 33, 35, 36, 40, 41, 42, 43, 51, and 52. And time permitting, we would do private and local bills for second reading, which are Bill number 20, the Trustees of Liverpool United Church Act, 22, Public Service Commission of Bridgewater Act, and 38, the Yarmouth North Baptist Church Act. And time permits, we will do third reading, Mr. Speaker. Madam Speaker, with that said, as that we do rise to meet from the hours of noon to 8 p.m., Madam Speaker.
Thank you. The motion is that we now rise to meet again tomorrow, Thursday, May the 8th, between the hours of noon and 8 p.m. Thank you. All in favor? Those opposed? The motion is carried. It's now the moment of interruption, and I now call under Rule 5.5, as read earlier today, a resolution put forward by the Honourable Member for Queens that reads, therefore be it resolved that the House commend the Department of Justice on the establishment of the first ever in Nova Scotia domestic violence court, which should begin to address the issue of protecting women against violence in this province. I now recognize the Honourable Member for Queens.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I stand. Thank you. I stand in my place tonight, Madam Speaker, with a heavy heart, but I also stand in my place with an enlightened heart. And Madam Speaker, I would suggest that tonight this is not a debate, that rather this is a continued discussion. It's a discussion to raise awareness, and it's a discussion to ask members for their continued commitment to continue the fight to end violence against women. Madam Speaker, on Monday, May 2nd of 2011, I, along with hundreds of community members, paid respects and said goodbye to Laura Lee Robertson. Laura went missing on April 14th, 2011, and 2 weeks later, her body was found in a wooded area in Bangs Falls, Queens County. Her fiancé was later charged with her murder. Madam Speaker, Laura was a daughter, a mother, a grandmother, an aunt, and a friend to many. Laura's death galvanized a community that banded together in support, making posters, putting together a ribbon campaign. And Madam Speaker, I'm wearing a ribbon today with both the colors of yellow and purple. Yellow symbolizing hope and showing support and faith that Laura would be found, and purple to symbolize the need to end and stop violence against women. The community held candlelight vigils. They set up Facebook sites with well over 800 members. They staged a protest walk to end violence against women. Laura's family, Amanda Jones and Tim Robertson and Mother Shirley, showed amazing strength and courage through this most difficult time. Laura's tragedy and meaningless death was broadcast province-wide and beyond. And Laura's family endured the public airing of some of the most intimate details of Laura's life. Madam Speaker, it doesn't matter what side of the tracks one is on. Domestic violence touches many. Many women, including myself, share a common bond, a common thread with women such as Laura, and that thread is one of abuse. A lot of women are able to make change, but many more are not able to make change, and they remain victims of violence. And Laura was one of them. We know, Madam Speaker, that stats show women are more likely to be a victim of spousal abuse. And I'd like to just share a stat from the Nova Scotia Advisory Council on the status of women. The rates for spousal violence involving female victims are higher compared to male victims of spousal violence in both Nova Scotia and Canada. According to police-reported data of spousal violence in 2007, approximately 8 out of 10 incidents of spousal violence involves a female victim, both in Nova Scotia and Canada. Madam Speaker, women who are abused or live for years in abusive situations often suffer low self-esteem, lack of confidence, depression. Some turn to alcohol and other substances, to help with and alleviate pain. Women in abusive situation have their health, dignity, and security compromised. They have feelings of helplessness, shame, and unworthiness. Violence against women, Madam Speaker, is unacceptable, and it comes in many forms: emotional and physical abuse, workplace violence, criminal harassment, bullying, intimidation, prostitution, pornography, sexual harassment, and even human rights violations. Madam Speaker, from 2006 to 2011, we have seen the loss and the silencing of many women in our communities, and I want to give names to some of those faces. January 2006, prominent healthcare professional Judith Bourgeois of Mahone Bay died at the hands of her spouse in a murder-suicide. November 2007, Shelley Marie Smith of Cape Breton strangled and her body burned at the hands of her boyfriend. February 2008, 12-year-old Carissa Boudreau murdered by the hands of her mother. July 2010, Christina May Eisner of New Germany was shot and killed at the hands of her husband. March 2011, in Antigonish, Otilia Sharika was found murdered at the hands of her husband. In March 2011, Jason McCrae was charged finally for the murder of his wife, Paula Gallant. And who can forget, Madam Speaker, that it was in March 1982 when Jane Hirschman fatally shot and killed her husband, Billy Stafford, and ironically, in Bangs Falls, Queens County. Jane suffered 5 years of brutal abuse at the hands of her husband. Jane had almost 10 years of some peace and some freedom